I see. Excellent. All right, let's see. People will join in a little while. So, Sudeep, if you invite people like Carlo Rovelli, we should really have to have kind of some decent audience, I worry about that.
Yeah, we will work on that. We'll work on that.
I don't know whether we know the formula yet. How to get decent audience. Here comes Paul. Hello there, Paul. You're muted though.
Sorry. Hello.
How are you doing?
I am racing too fast, so I should slow down.
Take a deep breath.
Adaptive spirituality here.
Take a deep breath and you'll be good.
Yeah, you guys have a nice field. It's coming in.
Okay, that's good. Yeah.
Not only from my diaphragm.
All the way from India, huh?
All the way. Absolutely. It's non-local and everywhere.
Let me take the opportunity, as we don't have others yet, to introduce you to my two colleagues. Sudeep Patra is an associate professor with us, and Divya Bhatnagar is a lecturer. They both come with physics and mathematics and apply this to social sciences.
Excellent. Excellent.
So Sudeep leads our work on quantum-like modeling and quantum social sciences.
We have a lot to talk about, Sudeep. I have a lot to ask you about, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, it would be great to discuss.
And guys, as you already know from the letters of introduction, Paul Bernstein is a political scientist, and he has written and has been doing all kinds of exciting work. But I guess here comes Anneloes.
Hello, good to see you
Welcome,
all.
Anneloes. It's nice to have a chance to be with you after reading so much of your work recently.
Same. It's an honor to be here with you.
Good.
I look forward to our conversation. Yes.
Yeah, and many more afterwards, I think.
That's right. Exactly. Yes. So many synergies with what we're all doing. Yes.
Yeah. Fruitful combinations, I think, coming out from this, hopefully.
Exactly. And I'm so glad because I started, when was this? In 1992. I started a degree political science. That's how long ago, at Leiden University and law. And if I see now what we're talking about in these topics, it's a world of difference.
Yes, and it was needed centuries ago, and we have to race quickly to have it catch up to problems that didn't slow down over the centuries. Yeah.
Very true. Yes. Let me send the link to Alexander just in case. Have you seen him already here? No, huh?
No, I don't see him on the platform yet.
Just do that right now.
Hello, Subhasish.
Hello, Paul. How are you?
Okay. Glad to be meeting more of your colleagues now.
Yes, colleagues, students, you see the whole, the bigger picture that Naresh has put together.
Yeah, the Jindal family.
Yeah.
I don't know where they are yet, but they hopefully will join in a minute. And I guess Alexander will join soon.
So I just connected with him on Messenger. So I see that he hasn't seen my message yet, but otherwise I'll phone him, no worries. How many people are you expecting for this?
About 25, 30.
Oh, so we still have some time. We have 8 people in the room, so we have time to fill up.
At this hour and with students, you never know for sure, but
yeah,
I'm assuming they will all show up, but I don't know if anything else is.
There's Alexander. He's got it.
Oh, how clever. He uses the ampersand for and. Yes.
There he is.
Greetings. Oh, we don't hear you. You're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, here I am. I will change my name so it's a little bit more generally accessible. Hello, everyone.
Hello, Alexander. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you.
Excellent.
There we are.
So our students should start joining now. Like, I don't know if they have had another class, maybe. So we just give them a few minutes to get connected. One of our other colleagues, Chester Grover, has joined us. She's a research fellow with us.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, Chester. Yes, you sent us the link. Your name was on that email. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Alexander, it's been a while. How have you been?
I'm doing all right. Still, like it's all the time feels like I'm rushing to catch up with myself, but it's fine. It's a beautiful fall day here in Argentina. It's bright and sunny and crisp, but very, very nice. I'm delighted to be here.
Excellent. Well, at least the ecology is doing well. I don't know if the economy is doing that well. Well, you know,
We won't go there.
You don't want it, right? Just enjoy the environment, yeah, for now. Right. So we'll get started in a few minutes, and I think students might have had a class up to 9:30, so our time, so they might be joining now. Let's see.
Now, is that evening class scheduled because they also have daytime jobs, or that's part of the university culture in India?
No, the way we do it is we have core courses which happen during the day, and we have electives. And some of the electives, like ours, is cross-school. So we have to allow all the schools to complete their core courses during the day. And then in the evening, we use it for electives so that people from different schools can attend these lectures as per their liking.
Excellent. You know, I don't know if that happens here in the United States, but it sounds like a sensible and nice evidence of commitment that people are willing to spend that many different parts of their day in their education that way.
Right. So in a minute or so, we'll get started, and maybe they will join. Others will join later. Let me just check in with Jasvi. Do you know if your colleagues had another class? Jasvi, you there? Well, let me check with Anand. Anand, can you hear me?
Yes, Prof. Good evening. Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. Do you know if your colleagues, students, had a class? Yes.
I think except for 4 students who mentioned that they will have the classes until 10:10, and then they'll join. And I think pretty much most of the students should be available and they should be joining.
Okay. Some of them have a class till 10:10.
10:10, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. All right, we'll get started then anyway. Thanks, Anand.
Yeah.
All right, guys, let me just welcome our panelists. I'm really excited by this panel because of the pre-engagement, so to speak, that I noticed among the panelists. They clearly hit it off well. I guess Paul kicked it off with some, he remembered his student days, so he wanted all students to get readings prior to the class. So he distributed some reading material. And so he will kick us off today. But Paul has been working with us. We are form a little small group. Subhashish is with us, Professor Subhashish Ray. He, Paul, and I have been having conversations around this broad theme that we're going to be talking about today. And that theme, and Paul and I got connected at this symposium that was organized and co-hosted by Anneloes and Alexander. So it was due to that, in that symposium, that he and I, and then I brought in Subhashish as well. So you guys have had a quick intro to Paul. He has been writing, he has been engaged with workplace democratization and internal dynamics, Ph.D. in political science from Stanford. And the important thing I remember about Paul is that he is given up on political science, and he thinks it now has to do with politics. If I recall that correctly, Paul, if I got you wrong, you will change my characterization when you start off our...
Well, state it one more time, because I didn't quite hear the distinction, and I know it's subtle and it's going to affect my reputation.
No, I just indicated that the one thing I would mention about Paul in addition was that he is tired of political science and wants to focus his attention on politics and changing politics, or at least give it a shot. And then, so we will start off with Paul. And of course, as you know, the theme of tonight's panel conversation is applied spirituality and new paradigm politics. The new paradigm politics, of course, was summarized very neatly in 3 points by Alexander that thought I was brilliant. And he said, what we are really talking about is spirituality, science, and one more thing that he will remind us of, but he put it quite nicely.
Systems, the 3 S's, spirituality, science, and systems.
And systems. Excellent. And then Anneloes has been writing so much. Everybody has been busy reading, and so many books, Anneloes. But you have a partnership with us, so many students know you from your engagement with us, with the Seeds Constitution work, with the conversations you've been having with Sudeep and doing a paper together and so on. We just are in total amazement of how you could do all that you do and be so prolific in your writing. So it's always such a great pleasure to have you with us as well. So I should mention that we have really a global team here, because we have Alexander out of Buenos Aires in Argentina, and Anneloes coming out of Mauritius, and Paul from somewhere on the East Coast of the United States. So great team. So without any further ado, I see a lot of our students have now joined, virtually all of them. So I'm happy to welcome all our students. They will all have a chance to engage with you as we go through. But let me start with Paul. Paul, over to you for your initial comments. Please.
Great. And because I don't want to use too much time, but I think I planned too much to share, can you give me a verbal prompt at about 7 minutes after I'm into it? Because we all were supposed to just do 10 minutes, yes?
Right, that's correct.
All right. Thank you very much. I'll try to keep track as well.
Okay.
All right. As Naresh very kindly said, my motivation is that sciences in general, and therefore not only political science in particular, should have over the last 100 years or so progressed to create remedies for our political afflictions, our political ailments, as fast as biology and the other life sciences have done for our physical bodies. We know, for instance, right now, just to look at some of the ailments in politics, there's this horrible war in Eastern Europe, where even humanitarian corridors are shot at and civilians are targeted. In Africa, there is this tragedy among the various peoples of Ethiopia, where the central government and the province of Tigray in particular are descending to levels of brutality that I think would embarrass each of them if they were having an audience like today. And then in my own country, another example which motivates me is the continual series of killings of civilians by supposedly their protectors, the police, whose officers are sometimes stopping them simply because of traffic violations or going into families' homes in order to resolve a dispute and wind up killing one of those members. So the motivations are very passionate for me. And because I did have a training in biology first in the life sciences, I did look at the history of politics not being remedied as fast as our diseases of the body have been remedied. And so I asked, what maturation factors, what allowed our healthcare behaviors to continue to develop into a mature way, into more sophistication, more subtlety, broader understanding, deeper understanding, while our political systems did not have that degree of evolution yet. And is there something we could learn from that contrast? And so I, excuse me for a second here. Oh yeah, I'm doing a little navigation to help me stay on course here.
Paul, did you want to show any slides or you changed?
I will. That's coming up soon. Yeah, thank you.
Go ahead.
There were three things that stood out from the development of the life sciences and medicine that don't seem to have occurred enough in the social sciences and political afflictions or political ailments. One of these is applying the scientific method. Yes, there have been attempts and there are sincere progress being made in certain things about politics, but what is inspiring to us as an ambition for the political and social sciences is to reveal and face honestly the root causes of our ailments, as that was done for physical diseases. And then as we learn more and more of the causes of the political dysfunctions, to experiment scientifically for remedies. That means inventing, testing, sensitively applying those potential remedies where it's safe, where the risks are low, in order to improve them to the point where they can be applied more widely. A second thing, aside from the scientific method and the development through experimentation of real remediation that we learned from the health evolution, is that the full-time practitioners, we think of doctors, nurses, other people, are held to a high ethical code, or they are not allowed to practice. They are not allowed to have effects on other people's bodies and minds. Imagine what it means for us to start getting seriously about saying that people who have political power need to have ethical codes that they pledge to, that they are trained about beforehand, and that if they fall below, they cannot exercise power. It's complicated because we like the ideal in our culture of a democracy where anybody of a certain age can be elected to represent their constituents. But as scientists, we have to be non-ideological about that and start looking at what are the real consequences of not having that level of ethical codes. And I was pleased to find that in other professions, not just health, for instance, in the civil engineering profession, the people who build our bridges, our buildings, also, because they have an impact on public welfare, on public safety, they're held to a higher standard. They're trained in that. They have to be certified in that. So this was a second important prompt for us to help develop cooperatively. And the third one was the degree of collaboration, the variety of different specialties that nowadays are brought to bear in order to meet a challenge of a new disease, as we've all seen in the mobilization across continents, across cultures, across various kinds of healing traditions in order to successfully beat back the pandemic that emerged just 2 years ago. Now I will switch, as Naresh was remembering, to a screen share. If I first see where this is. It's supposed to be just behind. It is just behind. Okay. So what, as Naresh was mentioning, he and I and Subhashish have been talking about what I call a collaboration network. And this diagram, so let's see. I first have to switch out of what I want to show you to go into Zoom itself so it can give me, yes, a share screen button and a second one. And now what I wanted to show you now. For me, I have to move away some of the pictures of everybody so I can see the screen. What we have here, I'll scroll it a little bit up to the top so you can see, I called it nodes of knowledge. These circles are various professions. You see journalism is here, spiritually motivated social reformers here, for-profit businesses here in the middle. And again, I have to move, maybe I'll just make it smaller in, so yes, it won't hide so much. In the upper left-hand corner of this diagram, I have the basic science group. That can be political science, government departments, it can mean policy sciences, as we are now in the Jindal school. And from that, in the upper left-hand corner of the diagram to the lower right-hand corner of the diagram, where we have political office holders, people exercising political power, but also on the right-hand side of the diagram, civic action activists, individuals, citizen groups. There's a whole host of skills and professions whose knowledge and talents could be very usefully brought together in task forces for designing, testing, implementing, and then applying various kinds of remedies to our political afflictions. I have foundations here. Some of them are very motivated to help society. They're not just floating in their money, for instance. You have special groups, the Forum 2000, which was started by Václav Havel, the president of Czechoslovakia, to help people in countries as he had been living before he was able to be president there, whose regimes need more democratization, and to give them support. People in the arts, films, book writers. Anneloes, our next speaker, is writing a 3-volume novel that's reaching people in order to educate them about transformation. Thank you very much. Think tanks. One nice thing about them is that although they may have lots of academic background, they're closer usually to wanting to apply things right away. They get rewarded for that. Sometimes people in, I'll speak for my own country at least, academic circles feel they're kind of dirtying their hands if they're doing too much application of their knowledge. It varies from profession to profession, but at least the think tanks already have a forward momentum. The problem with the think tanks is they may be very narrow ideologically. So if we're caring about science, they're not looking at enough variables. So they tend to put out proposals that they call remedies that may not be very effective. We'll talk about more of that in the general discussion. Journalism and broadcasting, various kinds of educators, all of these things we want in our collaborative network to draw talent from and have multidisciplinary, multi-talented task forces to do the kind of research, application, generation of potential remedies, and then testing them for further perfection. What I want to go to now, since there's only a few minutes left, is I don't know that I'll put this on the screen, so I'll stop sharing, but I'll be reading from, so I don't waste your time and I can be on point, a document that gives you a little bit more about what we mean in terms of, our operation now. As Naresh said, that Subhashish, he and I are just at the beginning of this. We're trying to be very deliberative and inclusive in how we design this infant network, but I wanted to share with you some of the things that are our immediate tasks. One of them is to find persons and organizations who already have very astute talents, competencies, and whose behavior is already guided by spiritual, ethical values and sensitivities. So the combination already in those individuals is important as we want to assemble these task forces. Invite the ones at this stage, before we even have the capacity to do one task force, is to invite them to become what I call liaisons. In other words, who within the journalism field have we noticed has all of these capabilities and this motivation, very future-oriented, that kind of thing. And that can be in any profession. And we'll begin to have contact with them. We're not trying to ask for too much of a commitment in my imagination of this, although we still have to discuss it together to figure out the best way to do it. So inviting liaisons to each of those skill set groups that you saw on the map. Once we find enough people who we feel and who show that they are interested in joining this kind of activity, then our task, I think, becomes to foster and assemble a team for doing that. And that requires a lot of facilitation and help. And I was very encouraged to find out the National Science Foundation in the United States is doing a similar thing, but they're, we'll ignore that phone, it's too far away for me to turn it off, sorry. They're focusing on things that don't have political implications because they're a government scientific organization and they wouldn't survive any funding, they wouldn't approve any time. But as far as bringing people together from many different specialties and having them design over a period of a year and a half, something with which they call major social impact. The National Science Foundation is already doing that. And so I want to study what their successes and their failures have been, especially as they try consciously, which their website describes, that they try to facilitate the working team's inner processes to remain productive. Because partly they're bringing people who have different languages, even if it's all English or if it's all German or if it's all whatever, they're coming from different professional cultures and things mean differences to them. And they're cautious about things that they're not used to from the others, but they have to work together if this is going to be successful. And then just two kinds of teams that I feel are urgently needed, but also over the long term need to be part of the human species ability. So we may start on this as soon as is sensible, but it'll still take many years for it to mature and have the impact it had. One I call the first aid or rapid response teams, and you can think of as the medical, Médecins Sans Frontières, the Doctors Without Borders, are available to any place on the globe. They respect local cultures, but they also bring highly developed skills that they know work in an emergency. Well, in the political realm, we see countries, it was more recently Kazakhstan, way back a few years ago, it was Hong Kong, where the public is strongly motivated to have the government not necessarily be overthrown, but to withdraw some of its policies or to change some of its policies. But what happened, especially in Hong Kong, because I tried to make sure it didn't just stay stuck, which was another story we'll get to, but the people in millions showing how many wanted a change, they didn't ever create a negotiation team to meet behind closed doors with the local woman, I forget her name now, who's in charge technically of Hong Kong, and allow for what all of us here know is humanly needed, that both sides in a discussion can't be made to feel so defensive and have everything in public that any change looks like a humiliation to them. So the purpose of this first aid or rapid response team is to bring experts who understand that and who are good at facilitation, who support both sides, the government and the marchers, but can allow something fruitful to then come out of that. Another case, of course, was Egypt after the.
But Paul, we'll come back to you. It's little over time.
Okay, so trust me, I've got a few other examples. And the third thing is then for science, we're building a database of hypotheses, variables for all of these different sources of knowledge that can affect political behavior. Thank you.
We'll come back. You'll get some more time. We just want our other panelists to chip in and add excitement to what you've been saying. So,
Perfectly.
great pleasure to turn it over to Anneloes.
Thank you, Paul. And yes, that's really, really valuable. Everything you just shared. I've made some notes of this. I'm going to weave with what you've shared. As a practical starting point, I just put in the chat an example of a collaboratory, because what how I'm, hearing what you're talking about is importance of collaboration. From our organization, Earth 5 Center, we've created a collaboratory. Alexander here is also a founding member of Earth 5 Center. And by design in the collaboratory, what we've done is indeed asked people from all kinds of diverse cultural backgrounds, fields, expertise. There's artists there, musicians there, scientists of different natures, entrepreneurs, storytellers. We have an Indigenous Wisdom Council there as well. And the experiment that we are in and why we set up this collaboratory is actually to see how by design can we co-create the conditions for a social tipping point that is generative. So as we are having to deal now with a lot of very destructive tipping points, we said, what if a tipping point is not just about an escalation event, but is a structural change in a system that is irreversible? And this is where I'm going to weave it in now to consciousness and applied spirituality. Yeah. Now, what we've seen now, there's been a lot of really great projects and ideas at an aspirational level, but if we're really looking at the state of the world and the role of humans in the state of our world, then it seems to be that at very critical moments when the tensions rise, when the challenges are up, when scarcity is on the table, that a lot of people are reverting back to very old behaviors. And very dualistic stances, creating polarization, divisions and conflicts, and maybe we could call that the disease of disunity. And so it seems that in addition to having clear ethical values and maybe even a moral compass or an ethical compass, we also need to have particular maturation and maturity in consciousness itself. And that it is not just at this stage about a state of consciousness. There is so many practices out there and courses and methods that people are being promised for experiencing particular states of consciousness, and people may experience in that moment their spirituality or coming into a spiritual perspective of life from a space of unity and wholeness. But yet when they then reverting back to those challenges I mentioned earlier, then often we seeing that it doesn't become embodied, it doesn't ground, and it doesn't last. And this is where in the collaboratory, what we've been focusing on is, what if we were now to combining, so the diversity thinking that's part by design of the collaboratory, a clear goal and objective and a vision, and that is to create social tipping points for societal transformation in the direction of regeneration and thrivability. And we're adding to that the field dynamics understanding of the new cosmologies and quantum physics as well. And to, rather than thinking again of states of consciousness, what is the field of consciousness that can act as an evolutionary cohering field that can then serve for the maturation that is so important. And then add on to that by design, collaborative challenges and attractors and affordances and systemic conditions. And so from there, I'd like to then weave it into how do we co-create then and become that new paradigm in politics? Or if we're looking at what's then the old paradigm in politics, let's understand or reflect for a moment, what is it about the politics of today that doesn't work, that has never worked? But now the problem is that this behavior, we've grown from 1 billion people to 7.5 soon. So if we're scaling a dysfunctional behavior at that level, it becomes even more disastrous. And that is, of course, this politics of first thinking for yourself, your own group, your own people, that isolationism, this national or nationalistic identity, and believing that progress requires competition and win-lose competitive dynamics. And if we're then looking underneath that now at the coding of our political systems, and that comes back then also to our constitutions. By design, we are creating systems, and we have constitutionalized systems where there's always a winner and there's always a loser. And so by design, we have created for dualized, polarized systems. And I believe, and this has been a lot of my research has been on about, is that we need to fundamentally change that. Therefore, we need different constitutions and whole different ways about thinking. How do we grow, learn, develop, and then mature to evolve? But in such a way that this collective consciousness field reaches the stage of maturation, so that when future generations are born in that field, becoming part of the human family, that they can benefit from that maturation. And that is when we're really going to have a tipping point, because if there is that particular maturation in the field itself that can hold that, and therefore also drive these new behaviors that we could call a new paradigm in politics, that means that we are then not reverting back to earlier developmental stances that are incredibly harmful. I believe that what that requires from all of us here is that we first need to become incredibly conscious and aware. How does the old paradigm live in me? So rather than just studying it as if it's somewhere out there, what are my own old paradigm behaviors? How am I also exercising right now my political agency? On the basis of what am I making decisions? What are my impacts? How do I know? How am I impacting life around that? All of us have political power, and we are all political agents. And so it's important that we reclaim that agency, but then with life as the foundation and the understanding of the urgency of this time. And then also start to understand that the very act of collaboration means that we are, by doing so, almost accelerating or supporting the maturation of our species. When I asked that question many years ago to Dr. Elizabeth Futurist, an evolutionary biologist, and my question to her was, can you help me understand better the maturation of species? And she explained that younger species, they tend to compete and fight for resources. And whereas if there's a certain maturation stage of species, they find out and they figure out that it makes a lot more sense to collaborate for resources, therefore develop our collaborative capacities, be co-creative and share those resources. So if we also, from that perspective, and that's why I appreciate very much what you shared earlier, Paul, if we're starting to understand indeed that collaboration is not only about what makes more sense to work together, no, but collaboration is how we are driving that maturation of our species, so we can create this tipping point in our species so that we're not going to revert back to these juvenile behaviors and responses that have brought our world now to the brink of collapse. And so I will pause it there so I can give space to Alexander so he can weave with this further. Alexander, over to you.
Thank you so much, Anneloes. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Naresh. Thank you, everyone, for being here and for your interest in this. This is important. This isn't business as usual. As you're clearly aware, what we're looking to do is to really explore the enterprise of being human. What does it mean to be human in today's world? And are we doing it well? Not just individually, but are we really humaning well? I like to use it as a verb. Do we human well together? So I have a few things to share, but let me just share with you a starting point that connects what Anneloes and I have been doing. I know you have this already, but I'm going to put it in our chat. This is the symposium where all of us actually got our kind of intermingling and intertwingling to begin with. So that is something that is fun to explore. And what came out of that is this book, which I'm also going to put into the chat. And that is the one that Anneloes headed up. The working on that, well, we both did it, but truly she is, as in most things here, quite the leader in these things. So those are just some kind of contextual references for us. I wanted to also, there are a couple of things. Remember that Naresh at the beginning was talking about, well, the way I summarized it in terms of the issues of science that Paul very nicely had us think about and focus on and understanding what is the enterprise of science, not just in its robust and rigorous and validation components, but also in a way that creates the platforms for us to human well. So that's critical. Systems, the systems perspective. This is what Anneloes has been talking about also just now very strongly, is how do we apply this in such a way that we see living systems? And I want to bring this back to something that Paul was saying also in terms of the networks. Both Anneloes and Paul were talking about these collaboration networks. And I think it's critical for us to remember and differentiate between networks and ecosystems. Because all ecosystems are networks, but not all networks are ecosystems. What does this mean? That an ecosystem is something living. An ecosystem has heart. An ecosystem has an interbeing. You can actually think of the spirit of the ecosystem and the interbeing of the ecosystem. The networks don't necessarily have that. You can have an information network. You can have a computer network. You can have a communication networks. Well, you know this very well, all of you who are also working in these areas. So the networks, you need to construct them, you need to connect them, you need to use connective intelligence to be able to understand what should be connected and how the flows are, for sure. But once you have them in place, they need to be maintained and operated. The ecosystem needs to be gardened. People are there. You can't be just a ecosystem architect. You need to be an ecosystem gardener. And there are people there. And there's why you have to have the care why competencies. So much of politics, as Paul was alluding to and others, miss this point. And we're like, we just have to make the system that everyone works in, but they mean the network system. So the question is, how do we create these ecosystems where there is caring? Four things, sorry, I wanted to mention also in relation to this, and I'll share a few slides too. Naresh, I did prepare some slides after all. So the idea that Paul was talking about think tanks, very important. This is pretty classical. We have the think tank, the place where we consult, get the ideas, they analyze, and they suggest, right? Then there are the do tanks that Paul was also talking about, the places where people, okay, how are we going to apply this? Very important to not have only think tanks, but to have do tanks. Then there are the link tanks. This is the kind of things that Anneloes was talking about a lot as well, which is how do we bring these things into synergy, into connection? How do we create that synergy, which is where together, we can do more, that no one of us is as smart as all of us. That's the idea of the synergy, and that's the linking, right? So there's a link tank. And I would like to suggest that there's also a source tank function. How do we connect with source? How are we exploring that ineffable component, which makes it the ecosystem and not the network, not only the network, right? Connecting with, so the source tanks are those efforts that bring into think tank, do tank, and link tank initiatives, the components of hearts, the components of spirit, the ability to human well. All right, screen sharing time. Well, that's wonderful. I'm not seeing the...
All our presenters have a presentation rights.
Great. Well, I'm just going to then share my desktop because it's not flowing from my option to the thing. But let's go right over to the here. And you should see the blank screen. And now, are you seeing the next screen?
Oh, we're seeing some serious rockets and stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, you see the science and technology and science and things? Good. Okay. Just making sure. All right. Well, look, so you see, this is a little bit what Paul was talking about as well. Often, our science and technology outstrip our humaning, the aspects, the soft aspects of being human: culture, economy, society, ethics, politics, right? We look for the technological fixes. It's not enough. Indeed, it has led us into the problem with the current paradigm in politics that is not actually connected to source, connected to heart. So the challenge here is to think about it in this way: the more powerful the technology, the more serious the secondary and unintended consequences. Maybe we might be able to agree with that. The Manhattan Project and the bomb and Oppenheimer, thinking about how, what has he unleashed? What is what, my goodness, the potential of this. And now, of course, with genetics and so on, genetic engineering, what potentials we have also, both for good and for bad. So the question is, if our thinking has not changed, but our technology has, then where are we drifting? This is what this guy with the bad hair day has saying, that our technology has clearly surpassed our humanity. It's one thing to have that as a think tank, but then what are we going to do about it? If our technology has surpassed our humanity, what is the new paradigm politics that brings us back into better equilibrium? So how are things moving ahead? Here are the kind of, I'm just going to put these relatively quickly here, but these are kind of things that are shaping the challenges of our world today. Geopolitics, socioeconomics, and health challenges are really an issue in these days. There are fundamental new realities in terms of potentials for crisis and for opportunities. We are experiencing this thing with the pandemic, with the wars that are going on in so many places in the world, and with global climate change. This is, of course, what is also creating this bigger context that we have and starting to see our intractable interdependence with all of life to create a viable, to sustain a viable planet. And of course, there are technologies which are moving tremendously fast. And I mentioned, of course, the genetics and the science that deals with energy. But when you combine things like nanotechnology, robotics, and virtual reality, you get things like micro robots who can go into your bloodstream and make changes happen in a guided way. So the potentials are tremendous when you combine these things, right? So we're living in this kind of a world. And of course, the virtualization of learning. Well, we're living in this right now, right here. And so what does this mean to connect with each other? As we said, Paul's in the US and Anneloes in Mauritius, and I'm in Argentina, and many of you are in India. And here we are. Here we are. What does it mean to be here? What does that mean? Here we are. Well, we are. So this is a different kind of world. And this is what we call often a VUCA world, where the situations are volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Scientists call it that. It's kind of like, these are more and more we're seeing conditions like this. The experience of these are often expressed as rupt, which means that the experience of VUCA situations is that they're rapid, unpredictable, paradoxical, and tangled. We get a lot of these situations on our day-to-day, and when we look at the news. So what are the challenges of living in a world like this? We have to live in a world like this, but we cannot meet these challenges alone. Why? Because all of us have blind spots. All of us have myopias. All of us have some kind of area of specialization. We don't know everything. We're not Renaissance people who know how to be architects and engineers and psychologists and economic. Okay, so we have our particular areas. And we also have our cultural biases, right? You have any idea what people celebrate here in Argentina? Maybe, maybe not. But how do we then help each other together to see the different perspectives? I'm wrapping up here quite soon, almost done. So the key here I want to share with you is this little technical framing of the law of requisite variety from a systems thinker, Ross Ashby. He says, if a system is to be stable, the number of states of its control mechanism must be greater than or equal to the number of states in the system being controlled. What does this mean? This means that if you're going to be a viable system that's going to survive the challenges of change, that you have to have in your potential repertory of responses n+1 number of possible responses to an environment that has n number of possible changes. If you don't have n+1 possible responses to an environment that has n number of changes, then there's going to be a change that comes along that's going to wipe you out, that you're not capable of addressing. Requisite variety combined with the VUCA world is a call for collective intelligence to work together to be able to understand our questions and our problems. We have to move from, I'm not going to spend long on this, but the idea is to move from survival to sustainable to resilient to thrivable ways of being and seeing in the world. I'm wondering if this thing is in the way, this thing down here. It probably is. You're probably seeing this too. I can hide that. I should have done that really, really a long time ago. There. Ah, you see? Okay. Anyway, so this is the, these are some interesting just ways of recasting our explorations. And again, understanding that we can only do this through collective engagement. This is the challenge as I see it, create these evolutionary learning ecosystems. The evolutionary learning communities, when they come together, form evolutionary learning ecosystems. They're communities of communities. When these are dedicated to discovering and innovating interdependent sets of solutions to these VUCA challenges for a just and healthy and thrivable planet, then we are on an interesting pathway to be able to co-create. Last slide. You see things as they are and ask why, but I dream of things that never were and ask why not. It's not enough just to look at what is. We have to engage, as Anneloes so clearly says in so much of her work, we have to be able to engage with the more than human world and to address ourselves in ways that are connecting with the imaginal domains. And maybe Anneloes in our conversation will share more about what it means to connect with those imaginal domains to be able to source our true understanding of interconnection and interdependence. I am done. Am I still sharing? I hope not.
Yeah, we are viewing Alexander Laszlo's screen from Argentina.
I see. So I gotta go over here. Are you serious? You still sharing? No, I'm not.
Yes, yes, we're seeing yours. We're seeing ourselves through your screen.
Okay, so I have to figure out.
Teaching us empathy, Alexander.
All right, thank you, thank you. Over here, stop recording, stop breakouts. I don't do that.
Don't stop recording.
Just click the share screen button. Yeah.
I did, and then you see all that.
Stop. Okay, any other, let me see if we can stop it for you.
Or IT is there.
Sorry, I think it will be just there on the top of, if you go towards the top of your screen, it will show the panelist.
I hit it and it's not anymore. So hang on, I'm gonna find it. You guys keep going and I'm going to go ahead and find it here.
All right, let's leave Alexander to.
Okay, I done it. I flipped it to my screen, so then it gets confused and it's out. So now fine. Yeah.
That's it. Thank you.
All right, so we are great, guys. Good start. Wonderful. So we're going to open this up, but if I might, let me ask to the three panelists a basic kind of question. If we think in terms of organic evolutionary growth and systems evolution, we who are, we are working on public policy and sustainable development, and we feel the reason we need public policy is that it might take too long for each individual to realize themselves as to what they truly are and change their behavior, so that we need it to go hand in hand, not one or the other. Individual change, yes, but public policy as well. Now, politics is centrally important to public policy. And if for a moment we define politics as that what politicians do, then we get a kind of a cynicism, right? Which I think we all share. We recognize that what the politicians of today are doing might not get us there on time. People in public policy I would argue, have failed to be able to communicate these ideas that we have all three just put on the table to these politicians. Many people indeed will say that's a complete waste of time. You cannot bother to try to change these guys. They are already lost. It's a lost generation. Focus your energies instead on places where you can make change. So we have those positions, but people, you know, at the age of the students in this class, and they will speak for themselves, I'm sure, are looking at policymakers who are largely politicians, public policymakers, and really worrying. Are they going to be able to do the right thing in time? Don't we have in India, for example, to allow rampant growth and more fossil fuel consumption and, you know, burning fossil fuels in order to generate a kind of growth that will hopefully reduce poverty? And these are some kinds of issues that are on people's minds. So how do we make the link to the brilliant ideas we have on the table and get public policy people to act in time? We are told all the time, every time the IPCC comes out with an updated report, they say we have less time. And so everybody says this is the last decade, otherwise we have lost, by and large, the fight against climate change, to take one example. You know, and then on the other hand, of course, species extinctions and social inequality and all kinds of challenges that seem as though we can't wait. And I get a sense that the ideas we put on the table are great, but are they going to be helping in time? That's my question. And how do we make it work in time? And I will leave it to any of you to jump in as you wish. Whoever wants to start.
Well, I'll just say as an opener that life has taught me that it's helpful to try to make a change on many levels of the system, in many parts of the system. And if Gaia is a system, then yes, official politicians doing official public policy is part of that. But to concentrate one's efforts on that or decide if that's enough may be already pulling oneself too strongly in that direction. Now, this is a school of public policy, so of course, it's appropriate for the people studying and teaching to decide how much can that be done and to keep themselves optimistic by looking at what other parts of the system are also progressing and maybe spending some time giving energy to those as well.
Yeah. Well,
Yes.
well,
It's a very important question. It's the golden question, right? That you are asking us. And I'll just round it back to my own life, because I like to speak from what I'm doing. So I'm not just speaking theoretically. So first, it's about the public policy is there because of the parameters of the game of public policies also that we are create. So it's also about how do we making sure that the prioritizations of issues are starting to become part of what also is driving the change in, of course, in public policy now. And that also means playing an advocacy role. So for all of us here, for example, in Naresh is what I used to do when there was no policy around zero waste and not to use plastic in supermarkets. I used to come with a little cloth mat in bag in the supermarkets and say, I want to weigh my vegetables in that, and can you put the sticker on that? In the beginning, they would say, no, that's not our policy. So can you change your policy then? Because I don't want a plastic bag. I want to have my fruits and vegetables in there, in this cloth bag, and I don't see the problem with it. So this is a very, very practical sort of driving the change. And we started to work here with schools, creating new school policies. And as part of the school policies, we then we integrated at a national level, zero waste policies for schools, so that it then escalates or goes down to the level of the parents, whereby the children then start to tell the parents, Mom, I can't bring a plastic bottle to school because we are now in a zero waste school. And I want to be part of that campaign. Yeah? And so again, always look with parameters of change wherever you are in your life. Comes back to what I explained before, your own political power, your own agency. So how can you drive pressure on the changes that are required, acting already from that future perspective of how would you act in a world where those unsustainable behaviors are absolutely unacceptable. So another way to flip that question is, how would you behave in a world that is thrivable, that is regenerative, that is conscious, that is empathic, that understands the importance of life and how to take care of it? And then in addition to that, start creating and co-creating the systems that model that behavior. This is what we've been doing in SEEDS and in Haifa, where we're experimenting with policy making and governance and the distribution also of opportunities and responsibilities within these new ecosystems on a weekly basis, where people are coming together in this experimentation with new digital currencies as well, hence the SEEDS constitution to guide that process, which acts as a compass and where also the values are embedded within that decision making. So that is the second aspect, start to co-create also those systems. And then the third one is also to find ways to reach out, if you can, to those people in public policy positions or who we see as politicians, reach out to their humanity. Don't fall into the duality trap of thinking that are those people and they are only interested in power. Yeah? So if we are stereotyping also those people, we are feeding the very, very patterns, but reach out to their humanity, help them see the possibilities, and then make it really attractive for them to change. So they start to understand as well that they want to have a voter spaces and a foundation for voters to follow them and work with them, that they need to be leaders for the future.
Alexander?
Just to complement what both Paul and Anneloes have been saying, this is really a question of both ending. It's not a question of trying to be like, let me leave it to others, let it take care of itself, let me be the one who does everything, let me have to be responsible. It's, how do you fit with it's a systems perspective. How do you fit with this so that your role, what you do, can maybe have a ripple effect in connecting with others? And how do you bring this perspective that Anneloes was just now talking about, this way of being, into your engagements? I'm also going to refer to something that Anneloes said earlier, the notion of the tipping point. There are these concepts of the tipping point where, the idea is that you have, here's a simple example. If there is, I'm going to take the example of snow and snow. How much does a snowflake, how much does that weigh? Like nothing next to nothing, right? But if you have a branch of a very strong tree, a branch that is out and it's snowing and the snow is landing on that tree, at one point, one extra snowflake landing on the branch and the branch will break. It reaches a tipping point where it can't sustain that amount of weight, even though it's just one little more bit. The idea of having this tipping point is being able to find the critical mass, as they talk about, to be able to make change happen, to make shifts happen. I want to focus on another aspect that I think it's also something that Paul was saying that I think for me is maybe the more crucial aspect right now. It's called the trim tab. I'm going to share my screen again. It's going to be a whole adventure. So bear with me here. See if we can do this. Do you see my screen now with the trim tab? Right. Okay. Well, this thing here it's coming from an article online. But the point is, this idea is that the trim tab is what these big boats have. These ocean liners and cargo ships, they're so big that it's very hard to make them turn. They have these huge rudders in the back, right? but you can't move them. Even if you put a lot of hydraulics, the metal bends because the amount of water that's flowing past them is so much that you can't push them. So how did they solve this problem in an engineering frame? They put a little rudder on the big rudder. You see the black part of that, the rudder in the back in the highlight. That's a little rudder on the big rudder, and that they can turn because it doesn't have that much water flowing by it. It's not so big. So they start turning the little rudder. That sets up turbulence on one side and creates more of a rapid flow on the other side, okay? That's the water, the hydrodynamics. That begins to push the big rudder. And then they can put the hydraulics in and start to move the big rudder more effectively. The trim tab is where you find the place to make a small change that will help a bigger change occur, okay? So the idea that I want to just suggest that we think about is in politics or in any place that you're working in, what are the trim tabs that you can identify? The places where you can intervene in a system, and maybe that's not the intervention that makes the change. That doesn't turn the boat by itself, right? But it begins the process. For example, what Anneloes is doing with seeds, right, is a trim tab for our global civilization, because it helps shift the values of the dynamics of value exchange among people. Value exchange is the basis of economics. So how do we then shift that in a way that becomes more healthy, life affirming, where profit is not seen as some abstract money base, but profit is how we live in relation to each other and with nature. How do we human well? So that was I want to just focus on that notion of trim tab. I think that's the leverage point for me, even more so, Anneloes, than the tipping point.
No, and all three of you might be aware that we do quite a bit of work here on complex adaptive systems. And so this kind of thinking fits naturally in the way we think about these problems as well. But if anybody wanted to jump in, or let me just open up the floor now and see who among our students or faculty colleagues, anyone, I mean, just feel free to jump in and pose any question. Professor Patra, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. So it's a fascinating panel and truly complex adaptive, because there's so many interesting ideas. And Anneloes and I also have been working on similar ideas for some time. But actually, I would like to just start with reflecting on what Alexander was just mentioning about, the small changes giving rise to like small changes giving rise to big symmetry phases. And, this is also very much the idea of modern cosmology, because you see that we start with this idea of particle-antiparticle symmetry, but maybe there is a very, very tiny amount of greater particles than antiparticles, which actually sustain this universe. Otherwise, this universe would have been just annihilated. So this trim tabs, as Alexander is pointing out, is present both in nature as well as in social science. The only thing is that we really need to explore that more deeply and come up with a more concrete framework that how to point that out. Because symmetry breaking is even much more important than symmetry. Because without symmetry breaking, nothing will emerge. No novelty will be there. So that is like really, I find that point is very, very important to understand, because we have, there's a very interesting book by Sabine, who is a very noted particle physicist and so on. So she says that, we have kind of devoted so much of time in understanding the beauty of math that we have been lost in that. Rather than that, we should have been understanding the, the symmetry breaking, the so-called ugliness, because that ugliness actually is much more novel, because that is what is creating. So that is one important point. I think that can be one interesting way of, shifting the mindset for doing social sciences also. And the second point I would like to say is that certainly there is this quantum-like modeling, etc., which Anneloes and I have been exploring for some time. But going back to the practicability aspect, which Naresh also mentioned, that's very important. Now, I was like discussing behavioral economics, with my students for some time. And I find that behavioral policy making, at least, has made some kind of connection with the real policymakers and politicians. I mean, at least the claim is that, by many experts, as well as if you go to the government websites, at least, UK or US or various other developed economies, they do acknowledge now that the time is ripe enough to go for alternative policy thinking. And they have the nudge units and all of these things. So maybe that as Anneloes and all of us were pointing out, that it is better to kind of reach out to the humanitarian side also, rather than having just have a pre-notion that, politicians are just like that, they won't change. So these are the kind of observations that I would just like to make. It's great learning. It's a great learning.
Any reactions from panelists before we go to another comment or question?
Yeah, and I echo what Steve was saying, and we have fascinating conversations around that, where we are in our paper now, that what we're exploring is how can this uncertainty principle of complex system become actually a condition for creative emergence. So is there also a different way of looking at uncertainty and unpredictability? Not as something as thinking it in terms of breakdown and chaos and all the language around that, but that there are perhaps deeper implicate orders of greater coherencies that once we, and this is linking it into the imaginal that Alexander was referring to as well, even if we can conceptualize and with our imaginal powers connect with those subtle orders, we are actually then attracting that future forward, and we're attracting the future into being. I will put a link there to an article that Alexander and I worked on for attracting our future into being on this very topic. So I think, yeah, what Sudeep is saying, I echo that, and I think that's really important.
Right. Let's see if we have any other comments, questions from our students or other faculty colleagues, students especially. Who wants to start? Anand, what's on your mind?
Sorry, Prof, did you mention me?
Yes, I was just asking what's on your mind after
I'm just
listening to all of this.
Just give me a few minutes, Prof. I'm thinking about
Sure.
connecting.
Anybody else in the meantime? So Ashish, it will be nice to hear as a political scientist, any reaction you might have.
No, I was just trying to wrap my head around what Sudeep was saying about more about what the physics that Sudeep was talking about, actually, about matter, particle and antiparticle, and yeah, that stuff. So I was just listening to the conversation. I don't really have anything. Yeah,
that's all right. I just thought that some of these things might have you might get a sense that this is so distant from politics that it might not even qualify to be called new paradigm politics.
No, I mean, the point Alexander was making about intervening at multiple areas and so on. No, I mean, not at all. I think these are, it makes a lot of political sense.
All right, just trying to get a little reinforcement, and that's good to get from you. That's your field of work. Right, Anand, ready?
Yes, Prof. Okay, I'll have to give an example before I ask my question.
Okay.
When we're talking about, for example, when talking about electric vehicles, which are good for the environment, right? People driving electric vehicles will be good for the environment. So when we get a little deeper into the subject, and what drives the electrical vehicle is the batteries, and what are the elements or the materials or compounds that are required to make those batteries. Then we go to lithium, cobalt, and everything, and how they are mined, and what are the sources of these elements to go into the batteries and all. So we kind of understand that the process of mining those elements itself is a huge environmental disaster, and the people who are mining them, there are illegal or blood mining happening and everything. So I'm just taking this example, and also when Professor Paul showed his first, sorry, I'll switch my video on. For the first stakeholders in policy making, for example, the government entities, journalists, academics, and almost every field that we can look for. So my question is, when we're trying to resolve a problem, towards the sustainable development, aren't we creating a completely new problem which we haven't seen until now? So that means, how do we how do we find that? How do we strike a balance when you're trying to provide one solution? It is creating another problem itself. So, when you talk about mindfulness, spirituality, and all these things put together, how can an individual, as Professor Alexander told, that the small thing in the rudder, which can help change the direction, which is totally acceptable. Yeah, I totally think that's extremely important point for any individual's growth, and also towards his or her perception towards the public policy. But when you are trying to create a solution, especially towards the SDGs and environment and everything, aren't we creating some other problem which we haven't envisaged until now? So how to look at that, and how to I will not ask the question how to resolve it, but how to address it, how to look forward to it. And for example, the EV here, an electric vehicle is being made, not made by the government, not proposed by the public policymakers, but it's from an individual, a corporation, or someone who's trying to create and make it, popularize it, and the people start using it. And so there is one gamut of entire ecosystem which is not under the government or the public policy making, when there is some inventions that are going on. But later we understand that, okay, this invention or this development has a deteriorating effect on the environment. So then we start being reactive to it, and we start thinking about all this. So there are two different ecosystems that sometimes in play. And how can we think about not creating a negative effect?
Right.
It's, even for me to put across this question, it's
we get the question, Anand. Thank you. Yeah. So you want to start, Alexander?
We can start, Alexander. Let's see what he says. A couple of things I want to say about this. First of all, the example of the electric vehicles, right? It's a good example to bring in. To be able to say that electric vehicles are good for the environment. No, they're not. Electric vehicles are not good for the environment. They're just less bad for the environment than the gas vehicles or the petrol vehicles, right? But they don't help them. In fact, as you mentioned, because their use of heavy metals and of other things, that the lithium goes into the batteries and so on, they're extractive. And then what you do with the batteries afterwards, I mean, they're not good for the environment. That's clear. Okay. So when we look at this framing, we often tell ourselves things that aren't really true. To be able to distinguish between technologies that are eco-efficient, like electric vehicles. Electric vehicles are eco-efficient. It's good. I mean, they are definitely much better than the petrol-based vehicles. But there's a difference between eco-efficiency and eco-effectiveness. So eco-effective technologies, what are they? How can we come into creating those technologies which are eco-effective, which truly are good for the environment, so that when the car goes through the city, it's filtering the air and it's leaving the air cleaner than before it passed through it. They have those technologies that they're working on, okay? There are other aspects which the car is not doing still so well. But the point is, those kind of innovations are ones that seek to be eco-effective, not just eco-efficient. On a bigger framing, and because we're talking about spirituality and politics and not just spirituality in technological innovation, which is important as well, I want to combine what we were talking about with the trim tab approach. Remember, it's looking at those maybe peripheral innovations, those changes in your own behaviors and attitude that may have a bigger effect, but not directly. The aspect of that not directly is what I want to focus on. I want to mention the art of obliquity. What is this art of obliquity? It is the art of going obliquely to where you wish to go. If you go straight at it and say, we're going to fix the climate problem, we're going to, there's so many interesting solutions where people say, here's how we fix the climate problem. Technologically, we're going to send a huge satellite into space and it's going to create an umbrella, a shade. And that way, we're not going to get so much direct solar heating of the planet, right? It's not a systemic solution because so many other things are going to suffer with that. Oh, but there's another way we can do it. We can dump a lot of the oxidizing metal into the ocean so that it rusts. And in the process of rusting, it will release oxygen tremendously. And that will help also counterbalance, yeah, but wait, you create a metal on the bottom of the ocean that is rusting, that's not a solution. So these are trying to fix the problem by going directly to a simple solution.
Right.
The art of obliquity says, how can we listen to what is emerging? This is where the spirituality comes in, and it's important. How do we listen to what is emerging? How do we listen to each other? How do we listen to nature? Well, I was talking about earlier about the collective intelligence. This is not just the collective intelligence of the communities. I talked about the ecosystems, right? But the human ecosystems, right? Beyond the networks, the ecosystems that we have. That's one aspect, but connecting also to nature, listening and being in conversation with your ancestors. And Anneloes has written so powerfully about this. And what are the ancestors asking of us now? And listening, and she just shared also the Attracting Our Future into Being article. Listening and being in conversation with future generations, because right now, each of you who are here are future ancestors. We are all future ancestors right now. And so who are we ancestors of? Well, people who aren't born yet. Well, one day we will be their ancestors. What are they asking of us? What are they asking of us now when they think of us as ancestors? What could we be doing now? So this kind of helps you in the listening and helps you with this art of obliquity, where you're letting the answers come to you as well. And you will know in your heart whether it's right to dump a lot of metal into the ocean to try to stop the, or to address climate change or not. And in your heart, you know, no, the fish aren't going to be happy. Other things will be. So that is the arts of obliquity, going together with the trim tab approaches. You can find your way. Will you ever know that this is the answer? No, but life is made up of this way of feeling, sensing into what is emerging, right? What you want to eat tonight, what socks you are going to wear tomorrow. You don't have to have it figured out right now, but at the time you will sense what is right.
Thanks very much. Paul, did you want to add anything before I turn to Subhashish?
No, this is fine. Thank you.
All right. Subhashish, please.
No, so I was listening so intently that I lost track of one question I had for Paul. But then I was thinking maybe, you know, because we have conversations, I can always ask later, maybe listen to more questions from others, but I'll still ask it, you know, because so Paul, you know, I mean, we've talked about this, right? So, I mean, the metaphor you use of medicine, ailments, and so on. So I guess the question is, in politics, is it easy to identify what the ailment is? So I was just attending right before for this panel. I was attending this panel on women. It was put together by the law school. Women and women in the far right ecosystem. And there were panelists from, they were speaking about India, they're speaking about far right movements in Europe, South Asia, and the involvement of women in these, obviously regressive, at one level, regressive political movements. And one of the interesting observations, I mean, it was not new to me, I knew this, it was sort of reinforced from other examples, is that one way to look at these movements, so you can look at it from one perspective, you can think of it as an ailment. It's a form of, they're getting attracted to a kind of illiberal politics. But then something else is also becoming apparent from these things, that at another level, women are also gaining agency through these, through these movements. I mean, they are also gaining a certain voice, a sense of, agency. So for example, recently there was this, anyway, I don't want to give too many examples of that, but yeah. So what seems like an ailment from one perspective could very well be, a form of agency, something that is granting agency to an otherwise repressed subject. So then, so what exactly is the ailment that we then try to solve in this? So that would be my question for Paul. I mean, just a thought, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good question. I enjoy the challenge. The way I would respond, and I think underneath this will resonate with you as well, Subhasish, is that we're all here talking about systems. So obviously the women on the right are experiencing, as you said, something that might be positive for their personalities. But it comes along with, to go back to the biological and medicinal analogy, it comes along with side effects. And we're not allowed as scientists to just ignore variables we don't like. So there are still approaches to, let's say, a movement that's not only far right, and I find it's helpful for science to dispense with ideological labels as soon as possible in needing to replace it with something more neutral, which is still very accurate and still measures the phenomenon. So it may be destructive movements. Are they trying to reduce the freedom of other people by imposing their proposed policy? Well, then it's clear. It's not that the movement is all good or all bad. It's a mixture. It's a system. It's got a lot of dimensions and a lot of attributes. And science knows how to approach that, which is with humility, and then the lucky scientists with spirituality. And so the answer comes, to what degree do we continue to support these people to gain voice, which is the positive response, at the same time getting into a dialogue with them, not preaching, but once they see we are supportive of part of their ambitions, they might listen to our telling them that we're disturbed by some of the other consequences that they may not have let themselves pay attention to. They may have heard of it, but they just rejected it because they're in an ideology which encourages people to reject things. That would be my response.
Okay, Paul, thank you so much. Thank you for responding to that.
Yeah. Okay, let's open up again and see, and then we will move to the panelists to have some wrap-up comments and bring their thoughts together very soon. Divya or Chester, anything? Chester, go ahead.
Yes, Professor Singh. I don't have a question, but I just want to echo what the discussion has been here. So what Professor Alexander has already mentioned about the trim tabs, I think, and the leverage points as we study in systems, the trim tabs, I think, are we the individuals. So in a democratic India where we have the voting rights, we choose our politicians and we know that they are replaceable. I think most of the responsibility now lies on what we as individuals or we as voters want the change to happen, which will actually depend on what we are thinking or how we are behaving in our everyday lives. So that we know what we really want to see in the system. So we become the trim tabs and not the other areas where we do not see any change. So that we really want those politicians or those people who come in the control rooms to give us the awesome governance we actually want. So I think the responsibility now again lies on what we individuals need and how we behave and think in our everyday lives, which will give us a public policy that we want. So I think that would be my a summary of what we have been explaining here.
Good point, Jester. Thank you. Okay, if I don't see any other hands up, then let me go back to the panelists for their closing thoughts. And let's start with Anneloes.
Well, thank you so much for all of you for being here, Naresh, for bringing us together, and also for both of you and Paul, for all the important work that you're doing, and we are really glad to support that. In closing, I'd like to ask everyone here, just write in 1 or 2 words what really was most important for you. What is your takeaway from everything that we've explored here together? That way we also get feedback from the people whose voices we have not heard, so that we ourselves here are becoming an ecosystem.
You mean in the chat, right?
Yes, please, to write it in the chat.
So can everyone write in the chat 1 or 2 words that catches, the key idea or feeling in your mind right now? And we're getting some interesting ones. Everybody, please do that while we hear from Alexander, and then we'll go to Paul. Since Paul started off, we will let him have the final word. So Alexander, your thoughts.
Right. Yeah, Paul is the instigating causality, as as Ludwig von Bertalanffy would like to say. Just also picking up on something that Chester just was talking about, how are we the trim tabs? I think it really comes down to this. When we're talking here about spirituality and politics and change, and not being the victims of change, not just seeing here that change happens to us, but understanding that change happens through us, which is a different approach than saying I'm going to make everyone change, which, as we know in the physics as well that we were talking about earlier, that's not the way things work. There's no art of obliquity in that, and there's a hubris of saying I will make the world change. We see what happens when you try to invade a country. It's not. Force is not the way. How do we harmonize? But then this is the questions then of listening well to the system, listening to, does it have heart? Is this a change process that is good? And just to pick up again more specifically on what Chester was saying, I'm going to, and Anneloes is probably sick and tired of seeing this, but this is on the back of my chair. So I'm going to share with everyone. I don't know if you can see this here. I'm going to get it closer and focus in here. So look what it says here. It says, be the systems you want to see in the world, right? Be the systems you want to see in the world. Well, of course, you know the famous phrase that's derived from, but what's fun about this is that it also says, be you in the world. Oh, that's important. Be you in the world, right? So this is not asking you to be anything else than who you are. And this, what we were talking about in terms of the sensing and the listening, it says the systems want to see. The systems want to see. So if you want to be the systems you want to see in the world, you have to listen. What do the systems want to see? What is it now? Do they want to be invaded? Do they want to have a dictator? Do they want, probably not. If you think and listen with empathy, empathy is at the heart of this. And that is what helps us be human. So to human well, to be the systems we want to see in the world, we have to use all the science that Paul has been talking about and others. We have to understand, but we have to turn the networks into ecosystems. We have to curate them. We have to be gardeners of possibility. We have to use obliquity. All these things that we've been talking about are that spirit of the politics that I think we've been exploring together.
Paul?
Well, thank you for that label, instigating causality, Alex. I'll have to try to see if I can fit comfortably into such a garment. What I'm feeling now is a lot of joy of discovering new colleagues, new potential collaborators, and that today's session technically has an end, but the more powerful fact is there's a flow, there's a movement, and what I'm learning from reading Alex and Anneloes' cosmologies is confirmation that everything in the universe is in motion. Even things we think are still usually oscillate, they revolve around something else. When we go still, our heart doesn't stop. There's motion, and it's a lovely oasis that we populated today, that we settled into to be with each other, and we continue in motion onward, enriched by what we gave each other.
Thanks very much, Paul. In summarizing, and not summarizing, who can summarize this? But just in closing, I might say two things. One is drawing from Alexander's three phrases, which I can now remember and will never forget anymore. Those spirit, systems, and science. Those are the three pillars, in a way, of the work we do at our Center for Complexity Economics, Applied Spirituality, and Public Policy, which does not bring out as clearly as it should the work on quantum-like modeling as well, that is included in the center's work. So what we have been talking about and what we are seeking to do, both to teach as well as to do research on and to bring these two together, is exactly what happened here tonight. So I couldn't be happier that all of you would join us and bring this and help us to bring it together. And the last little point I'd make is, when I was listening to the statements of obliquely addressing some problems and not directly addressing them. You know, I grew up and was trained as a scientist, and then when I got my first job as a director of a regional body, the guy who was interviewing me, who was the Secretary General of the Caribbean Community, he says to me, you know, Naresh, you've been a scientist, and now you have applied to be the director of this regional body. So you will not be doing too much science. Can you tell me what's the difference between being a scientist and being a diplomat? Because your work will now be diplomacy. I couldn't answer that question. I thought I wouldn't get the job. I did get the job, but he says, I'll tell you very quickly what it is. And he says, look at a little boy on the road. When there's a pool of water, he will walk directly through that pool of water, even if the rest of the road is dry. But when you grow up and there's a pool of water, you walk around the pool of water to get to the same point on the other side. And that's the art of diplomacy. To get to the same point the other side without going through that mess. And that came out today, and I suspect that in a way I see it encapsulating some of our conversations about how to deal with these issues. Look, all in all, this was a real treat for us. Let me thank the three of you, Paul, Anneloes, Alexander, all our faculty colleagues who are with us as well, of course, as all the students who have stayed up. They have all stayed up all the time and still with us. So apart from being good students, and I would imagine that they have really enjoyed it as well. So thanks to all, and that will bring us to an end. We will, of course, be following. Thank you very much, and bye-bye now. That will bring us to an end.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone. Thank you so much.